We know very little about one of the greatest diasporas in the history of humanity, the movement of people across the Pacific. Enigmatic shards of beautiful pottery have spoken of the first culture across these far-flung islands. But until recently, we knew very little about the Lapita people. All that has changed over the last decade with the excavations at this most remarkable site in Vanuatu, on the main island of Efate. 3,000 years ago, the sea was just there, but since then the land's risen by about 8 metres. This rise was a headland, and it was the perfect place to bury your dead. This site, called Tioma, has been the centre of research for archaeologist Matthew Spriggs.
This is the first early Lapita cemetery that's been found, and it's given us tremendous insights into their attitudes to death, the rituals involved in burial, and also gives us a context for one use of the pottery, which was clearly to accompany people in their graves.
I'd barely arrived at the Tioma site when 2 more bodies were uncovered.
I'm cleaning bones of a small baby. This baby died at the time of birth or when he was a fetus. This is the 8th baby we have found, and there is another in this corner over there.
It does seem unusual, even macabre, that 2 skeletons from such young individuals are found so close to each other. But that is only part of the story.
The speciality of this cemetery is to have adult and babies, no child. So we are wondering what happened here. Is that a kind of ritual? Is that a general practice of Lapita people? We don't know yet, but we hope to answer this question.
The delicate little bones are all faithfully recorded exactly where they were found in this site. So far, over 80 individuals have been found at Tioma, and they tell us a lot about these long-lost ancient people. Frederick, these are 3 beautifully preserved skulls. What can you tell me about them?
Those 3 skulls were found sitting in a row on top of a chest of a 4th skeleton.
And I gather that even the jaw doesn't belong to this skull.
Yes, effectively. You have 2 males there and a female in the middle, and another individual represented by the mandible.
Teeth from the graves were sent to the ANU in Canberra for analysis. Here, they were zapped by a laser, and the vapours were analysed to accurately determine their chemical composition. From this information, they can work out some details of the ancient diet. And it's an unexpected result.
It seems like the men that we've analysed have a much more maritime-dominated diet, where the women from the site seem to eat food that's a lot more from the terrestrial realm.
So there's some kind of resource partitioning going on. Perhaps the men were doing all the travelling at sea, while the women stayed on shore. Another kind of analysis examines the ratio of elemental isotopes in the teeth to work out where the individual might have come from. Once again, the results are surprising.
What it seems to tell us is that the teeth that we've worked on are from individuals that grew up in Vanuatu, but not necessarily at the Tioma site.
Among the other treasures from the Tioma site are an abundance of pottery shards.
It is a Lapita pot, but it's not dentate stamped. It's been incised with a sharp tool. You can see that it's got a sharp inflection there, so it would be quite a large pot.
To make sense of the numerous shards of pots, I have to go back to the Vanuatu Cultural Centre in Port Vila, the capital. Here, archaeologist Irawa Phillips slowly pieces the pots back together. His colleague, Richard Shing, uses drawings and computer scans to reconstruct the exquisitely complicated designs on the pots.
By drawing all these patterns over the number of years, we found out that they use something like a comb to stamp the tools, but there are only a few different shapes which they use. Like they have the curve, and they have the line, and they have the circle, and that's it.
The results of all this reconstruction work are some of the most beautiful pots I think I've ever seen. It's the pottery that makes this site so important. Normally in a Lapita dig you'd expect to find a couple of shards of 1 or 2 pots. Here they found over 100 pots and plates, many of them almost complete. And this one had a skull in it. And that's one revelation from the Tioma Cemetery excavation. The main use for elaborate Lapita pottery appears to have been associated with burials of the dead.
Of more than 50 years of research, 250 Lapita sites found across the distribution from island New Guinea right across to Fiji, Tonga, Samoa. There's only ever been a handful of burials, and many people speculated that because they were sort of seagoing people, that perhaps most of the population was buried at sea.
You can tell great stories from little bits of rock. This is a piece of obsidian, and the Lapita people used it for making knives and blades. Now, there's no way this came from Vanuatu. Back at the ANU in Canberra, Christian Riekmeyer has been taking a closer look at these gleaming flakes of glassy rock.
I have a look at certain attributes from the obsidian to see how big they are, in which direction they were made. And the other thing I'm doing is I do a geochemistry analysis to find out where they come from.
And it's the question of where they come from that yields the biggest surprise.
These pieces came from West New Britain, and that's about 2,500 kilometers away.
So while it had long been suspected that the Lapita people were moving about a lot, the obsidian gives us new insights into just how much travelling they were actually doing.
My idea is that early on, they're really moving about on their canoes very widely in the Pacific. In fact, to an extent that never happened again until you started getting sailing ships in the 19th century. You know, people were more mobile 3,000 years ago over much of the Pacific than they ever were again until recent times.
The best of the pots are going on public display for the first time. Tonight's opening night, and I've been invited. It's really quite a big event.
These pots are so rare, and in the exhibition here there's single examples. There's no others in the world.
People are seeing something for the first time which they've never seen, which is their history.
After a period on display here in Port Vila, these pots are off to be exhibited in Paris. It's a unique opportunity for the people of this tiny South Pacific nation to stand proudly on the world stage and proclaim their heritage.